The wrong terminal was the first lie. I just didn't know it yet. My name is William, and 9 years into my marriage, I was standing at the curb of Asheville Regional, hazards blinking, watching my wife pull her suitcase out of my trunk at Terminal B when her flight. I checked it twice on my phone that morning. Left from Terminal A. Wrong side, L. I said, already reaching for the trunk release again. No, it's fine, I'll walk, she said, too fast, the wheels already spinning against the curb. It's connected inside. I looked it up. It wasn't. I knew that airport. I'd flown out of it a dozen times for site inspections. There was no walking from B to A once you cleared security. You'd have to come back out through the doors and start over. But she was already kissing Mia's forehead through the open back window, already telling Noah to be good for daddy, already moving like a woman who wanted the car gone before I could ask a second question. I didn't ask it. That was who I was, 38 years old, built like a man who fixes bridges for a living, and constitutionally incapable of pushing on anything that might crack open into a real conversation. I'd spent a career making sure structures didn't buckle under pressure, and I'd spent a marriage making absolutely sure I never applied any. Text me when you land, I said instead. I will. She didn't look back at the car once she'd cleared the sliding doors. I remember that. I didn't think anything of it in the moment. The way you don't when a 4-year-old is asking if mommy's plane has Wi-Fi, and a 7-year-old wants to know if she'll bring back a snow globe. But somewhere in the part of my brain that used to calculate load tolerances for a living, a very small number had failed to add up, and it sat there quietly, waiting for me to notice it. We'd been married 9 years. 2 kids, Mia, 7, all elbows and opinions, and Noah, 4, who still believed his father could fix anything with the right tool. Elena was 34, a dental hygienist at a practice off Marymount Avenue, the kind of woman who remembered every patient's dog's name and every coworker's anniversary, and somewhere in the last few years had started remembering less and less about her own. I want to be honest about something before I go further, because if I'm not, none of what happens later will make sense. I was not an easy man to be married to in the ways that don't show up on paper. I paid the mortgage on time. I never raised my voice. I coached Noah's t-ball team and never missed a school pickup. But if Elena ever tried to tell me something was wrong, really wrong, not dishwasher wrong, I'd nod and fix a snack and change the subject, and somewhere inside I'd feel a door quietly closing. Conflict, to me, was a structural failure. You didn't cause one. You engineered around it. She'd told me, for months earlier, over dishes, that she felt like she was disappearing. I'd said, "You're not disappearing, you're just tired," and handed her a towel to dry with. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to know badly enough to risk finding out. That's the man who drove home from the wrong terminal that Thursday morning. Radio on. Kids arguing in the back seat about a video game. No idea that in 19 days I would understand exactly why she'd wanted out of that car before I could look too closely at anything. The trip, as far as I knew, was a 3-day dental hygiene conference in Charlotte. She'd mentioned it 2 weeks before, casually, over coffee, the same way she mentioned everything now, like she was narrating a life that belonged to someone slightly to the left of her. Continuing education credits, she said. A hotel block through the association. She'd already looked into who could take her Friday shift. I didn't check the conference dates. I didn't check the hotel. I didn't check anything, because checking would have meant admitting there was something to check. And for 9 years, my whole approach to marriage had been the absence of that question. 3 days later, she'd be home. I had no reason to think otherwise. I drove the kids to school, went to a job site off Tunnel Road where a parking garage was 3 weeks from finished, and by 10 in the morning, I had genuinely forgotten the terminal thing had happened at all. It would take a missing $300, a woman named Priya who lived 4 houses down, and my own sister's face going carefully blank at a Sunday dinner before I let myself remember it again. By then, it would already be too late to unknow anything. The first 2 days she was gone were unremarkable in a way I can only really appreciate now. Wednesday night, the night before I dropped her, I'd noticed she was showering later than usual, close to 11, long after the kids were down. I heard the water running when I went to check on Noah, and when she came out her hair was different somehow, product in it that didn't smell like our bathroom. I didn't think about it again until 11 days later. I should have. Thursday, the day of the flight, I texted her around 6 that evening. Land okay? Kids miss you. No response until almost 10, and when it came it was short. Made it. Long day, heading to bed. No photo of the hotel, no complaint about the conference, nothing like the running commentary she usually sent. A bad continental breakfast, a boring keynote, a joke about the carpet in some Marriott ballroom. Just 4 words and a period, which Elena never used in texts. She used exclamation points the way other people use commas. I noticed it. I filed it under long day and went to bed. Friday morning, Mia asked if she could call mommy before school, and I said sure, and dialed, and it rang 4 times before Elena picked up sounding like she'd been running. Hey, hi, sorry, just conference stuff. Can I call her back tonight? Behind her, I heard something that didn't sound like a hotel hallway. It sounded like wind. Outdoor wind, the kind you get standing somewhere open, not in a carpeted conference center in downtown Charlotte in October. I want to stop here for a second. If you've ever replayed a single sound over and over months later, trying to figure out if you actually heard what you think you heard, or if your memory rebuilt it afterward to fit a story you didn't have yet, you know how unreliable that kind of remembering becomes. I've gone back to that phone call in my head more times than I can count, and I still can't tell you if the wind was real or if I put it there later, once I knew what to listen for. I told Mia mommy would call back. She did, that night, and was warm and normal, and asked about Noah's soccer practice and Mia's spelling test, and by the time I hung up, I'd talked myself out of the wind entirely. Saturday, alone with both kids for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did the things you do. Pancakes, the park, a Target run for poster board because Mia had a diorama due Monday that she'd somehow kept secret from both of us until Friday afternoon. Somewhere in the Target checkout line, my phone buzzed with a bank alert. Suspicious activity flag cleared. Recurring charge, Bloom and Birch Floral, $84. Elena didn't order flowers. In 9 years, I could count on one hand the number of times either of us had bought the other flowers, and never through a florist with a name like that, and never on a recurring charge. I looked at it for maybe 4 seconds in a checkout line with a bored teenager scanning my poster board, then put my phone away because Noah had picked that exact moment to announce he needed the bathroom urgently. By the time we got home, I'd forgotten about it. That's the thing nobody tells you about denial. It isn't always a decision. Sometimes it's just a 4-year-old's bladder arriving at the perfect moment to save you from a thought you weren't ready to have. Sunday, my sister Rachel came for dinner, like she did most Sundays since her divorce 2 years back, treating our kitchen table like a lifeline she wasn't ready to admit she needed. She asked, over pot roast, how Elena's conference was going. Something happened in Rachel's face when she asked it. Not suspicion, the opposite. A carefulness. The look of someone stepping around a hole in the floor she already knows is there. Fine, I think, I said. She's not big on details when she's working. Rachel looked down at her plate a beat too long. That's good, she said, and changed the subject to Noah's soccer coach. And I let her, because that's what I did with anything that felt like it might require a follow-up question. I didn't think about Rachel's face again until I absolutely had to. Elena came home Sunday night, tired looking in a way that read as travel tired, and told me the conference had been fine, long, forgettable, and I believed her completely, because believing her was easier than the alternative, and because nothing, not the wrong terminal, not the missing exclamation points, not the wind on the phone, not the flowers, not my own sister's face, had assembled itself yet into a shape I couldn't unsee. I didn't know it yet, but the florist receipt sitting unopened in my email wasn't the smallest thing I'd overlooked that week. It wasn't even close. The next 10 days moved like ordinary life does when you're not looking for anything wrong, which is to say, they moved fast, and I mistook the speed for safety. Elena went back to work Monday. The dishwasher broke Wednesday, and I fixed it myself, the way I fixed everything, alone, in the garage, with the radio on, and somewhere in the middle of replacing a valve I thought about Rachel's face again, unprompted, and pushed the thought away with the same motion I used to seat a bolt. Thursday night, Elena's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs putting Noah to bed, and I glanced at it the way you glance at any phone that isn't yours. Not to look, just because it lit up in your peripheral vision. A name I didn't recognize. Marcus. No last name, no context, just, miss you already. Same time next month. I stood there for what felt like a long time, and was probably 11 seconds. Marcus could have been anyone. A coworker organizing a work thing. A gym buddy. The association's conference coordinator with an unfortunate texting style. I built 4 separate innocent explanations in the time it took the screen to go dark on its own, and I believed the fourth one enough to walk away from the counter without opening the message. That's the moment I keep coming back to now. Not because it was the worst thing that happened. It wasn't, not by a long distance. But because it was the moment. I had a door standing wide open in front of me, and I chose, deliberately, to close it myself. Nobody made me walk away from that counter. I did that. Saturday, Elena mentioned, almost as an aside while packing Noah's soccer bag, that she'd be going back to Charlotte in 3 weeks for a follow-up training session. Something about updated infection control certification. I said that sounded like a lot of conferences for one industry. She laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, and said, "Tell me about it." I didn't design the accreditation system. I laughed too. I want to be honest that in that moment I felt nothing. No dread, no clarity, nothing. Just 2 tired parents packing a soccer bag on a Saturday morning, and somewhere behind that ordinary scene, a second life running in parallel that I had no map for yet. Monday, I ran into Priya from 4 houses down at the mailbox. She was newly separated from her husband, a fact the whole street knew because moving trucks are not subtle, and she'd always been kind to our kids, the kind of neighbor who kept extra popsicles for exactly this purpose. She asked, out of nowhere, how Elena's trip had been. "Good, I think," I said. "Which one?" "She's got another one coming up." Priya's expression did something small and quick, gone almost before I registered it. The same careful blankness Rachel had worn over the pot roast. "Oh, right, of course," she said, too smooth, and changed the subject to whether we'd noticed the new stop sign at the corner. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles over a conversation right after someone decides not to tell you something. Maybe you felt it, the half-second where a person's face catches up a beat behind their words. I felt it twice in 8 days from 2 different women, and I still didn't ask either of them what they knew. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a lot of things that month. Tuesday, going through our joint account to pay a contractor, I found the florist charge again. A second one, $91, same vendor, dated 2 days before Elena's Charlotte trip. I opened my email this time and searched Bloom and Birch. Nothing. No confirmation email, no receipt forwarded, nothing in any folder. Whoever had ordered those flowers hadn't wanted a paper trail landing in an inbox we both technically shared. I sat with that for exactly as long as it took Noah to run into the office asking if I'd seen his other shoe. Then I closed the laptop and went to find the shoe. I didn't look at the account again for 6 days. I told myself I would, later, when things were calmer. Things are never calmer. That's the lie conflict-avoidant men tell themselves on a loop, and I told it to myself as fluently as I told my kids there was nothing to worry about. She thought that quiet would hold. It held for exactly 6 more days. Everything changed on a Tuesday because of a receipt Elena left in her jacket pocket instead of her suitcase. I was doing laundry, her jacket, my job that week, a small, unremarkable division of labor 9 years deep, and a folded slip of paper fell out onto the dryer. A hotel receipt. Not Charlotte. Asheville, 20 minutes from our own house. Dated the Thursday I dropped her at the wrong terminal. Checked in at 11:40 a.m., the same morning her flight was supposedly leaving from a terminal she'd never actually walked into. I stood in the laundry room holding it for a long time. Long enough that the dryer buzzer went off, and I didn't move. She told me, much later, what was happening on her end that week. This is what she was living through, though I knew none of it yet. I told myself it was one night. I told myself that a lot. Actually, I'd been telling myself some version of it for 3 months by then. That first time, in July, I hadn't planned anything. I'd gone to get my hair done and Marcus was the stylist's husband, picking her up, and we just talked in the parking lot for 20 minutes about nothing. His kids, my kids, how tired we both looked. It felt like being seen by someone for the first time in years. I told myself talking wasn't cheating. Then coffee wasn't cheating. Then I told myself the hotel was just so we could talk without watching the clock, without someone from the neighborhood walking past a coffee shop window. I believed every one of those sentences completely while I was saying them to myself. That's the part one still can't explain to anyone, how true they all felt in the moment. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. All I had was a hotel receipt with a wrong date on it, 20 minutes from my own house. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself I needed more than a receipt, which was true, but underneath the practical reasoning was the same old architecture. If I didn't ask yet, it wasn't real yet. I started, quietly, to build a file. Structural engineers are good at documentation. It turns out that skill transfers uncomfortably well to investigating your own marriage. I pulled 6 months of the joint account statements and found 11 Bloom and Birch charges going back to April, none over $100. All time 2 or 3 days apart from something else. A hotel charge here, a gas station 40 minutes outside town there. Always somewhere Elena had no obvious reason to be. Wednesday, I called the Dental Hygiene Association listed on the flyer Elena had left on the counter. There was no infection control certification course scheduled in Charlotte that month or the month before. There had been one, 8 months earlier, in Raleigh. Elena had never mentioned Raleigh. I didn't think about it again until I had the phone in my hand and the association's answering machine picked up on the 4th ring. I should have called that number the very first week. Thursday, my daughter, 7 years old, entirely without agenda, asked me at dinner why Mommy always took her phone into the bathroom now. She used to leave it on the counter, Mia said, spearing a green bean. Now she takes it every time, even for like 2 minutes. I said, maybe she's just texting Grandma. And Mia shrugged and moved on to a different injustice entirely. Noah had gotten a bigger scoop of ice cream. But I sat there feeling something in my chest tighten in a way I couldn't name yet. A 7-year-old had noticed a pattern that had taken me 4 months to see, and she hadn't even been looking for one. Friday, I drove out to the address on the hotel receipt on my lunch break, told myself I was just going to look, and sat in the parking lot of a mid-range chain hotel off I-40 for 11 minutes without going inside, feeling like a stranger in my own life, before driving back to the job site without saying a word to anyone. Saturday night, Rachel came for dinner again, and this time, halfway through dessert, I asked her directly, the first real question I'd asked anyone in this whole ordeal. Do you know something about Elena I don't? My sister put her fork down. She didn't answer right away, which was, in itself, an answer. William, she said finally, quiet, careful. I saw her car at the Hampton Inn on Tunnel Road back in August. I told myself it was probably nothing. I didn't want to be the one who started something I couldn't finish. If I had asked Rachel that question in August instead of October, everything that followed would have unfolded on a completely different timeline. I know that now. I didn't know it that Saturday night, sitting at my own table with dessert going warm in front of me and my sister's face finally uncareful, finally honest, finally telling me the thing she'd been protecting me from for 2 months. I had the florist charges. I had the wrong terminal. I had a hotel receipt with a local address and the wrong date. I had my sister's confirmation and my daughter's quiet observation, and 11 days still standing between me and the moment I finally said something out loud. I spent that Sunday putting it all in a folder, printed statements, the receipt, dates lined up in a column like load calculations on a beam I already knew was going to fail. I didn't know yet that the second Charlotte trip, the follow-up training, was 3 weeks away and already booked. I didn't know that this time, I'd be the one deciding what actually happened at that airport. I didn't wait 3 weeks. I confronted her on a Tuesday night, 11 days after the laundry room, after the kids were asleep, with the folders sitting closed on the kitchen table between us like something with weight of its own. We need to talk, I said, and slid the folder across. She looked at it before she looked at me, and I watched something in her face rearrange itself in real time. The exhaustion of 9 years of playing 2 roles finally catching up to the muscles in her jaw. What is this? She said, but her voice already knew. Open it. She didn't. She sat very still, hands flat on the table, and for a second I thought I was going to get silence, the kind of quiet collapse I'd half expected. Instead, something in her seemed to snap loose all at once. You've been going through our bank statements, she said. You've been, what, building a case against me? I found a hotel receipt in your jacket pocket, 20 minutes from this house. The same day I dropped you at the wrong terminal. So this is an interrogation now. In our own kitchen. It's a conversation you've been avoiding for months. Don't you dare make this about what I've been avoiding. Her voice was climbing now, fast, years of something underneath it coming up all at once. You want to talk about avoiding? You've avoided every real conversation we've had since Noah was born. I told you in June I felt invisible in this marriage, and you handed me a dish towel. A dish towel, William. That's not the same as this, isn't it? You checked out of this marriage years before I did anything. You just did it quietly, so nobody could call it what it was. So this is my fault. I heard my own voice rising to meet hers, something I almost never let happen, and it scared me a little, how fast it came. You're going to stand in our kitchen and tell me you slept with someone else because I didn't do the dishes right. I'm telling you I stopped existing in this house except as a function. Meals, laundry, school pickup. Nobody asked me a real question in 3 years. I'm asking you one right now. How long? She didn't answer that. She stood up instead, paced to the window and back, arms crossed hard over her chest. And when she spoke again, it wasn't an answer, it was an accusation. You want to talk about lies? You've been building a file on me. Printouts, dates, like I'm a job site you're auditing. Because you wouldn't give me anything else to go on. Lower your voice. You don't get to tell me to lower my voice in my own. Mia's room is right above us. Something in her face changed, fast, real fear this time, not deflection, and we both went quiet at exactly the same second, listening for footsteps on the stairs that never came. For a moment, neither of us said anything at all, the whole fight suspended in that shared, involuntary flinch toward our daughter's closed door. It didn't end the fight. It just changed its temperature. His name is Marcus, she said, quieter now, but not softer, flatter, like something being set down after being carried too long. I've been seeing him since July. For months. For months, she said. And before you ask, no, it wasn't just physical, and no, I'm not going to pretend it was some meaningless mistake to make this easier for you. It mattered. That's the part you actually can't forgive, isn't it? Not that it happened, that it mattered. I didn't have an answer for that one right away, and the silence that followed felt worse than anything either of us had shouted. Tell me everything, I finally said. All of it. From the beginning. She sat back down across from me, and something in her posture shifted, not defeat exactly, but a kind of surrender to finally saying it out loud after 4 months of carrying it alone. It started at Mia's spring dance recital, of all places, she said. Marcus's daughter was in the same class. We'd talked before, in passing, the way parents do in a hallway waiting for kids to change out of costumes. That day he asked how I was doing. Actually asked, and waited for the answer instead of already thinking about his phone. I told him the truth. I don't even remember what I said, something about feeling like I'd disappeared inside my own life. And he just looked at me, like it was a normal thing to say out loud. Nobody had looked at me like that in years, William, including you. For weeks it was just texting. I told myself it was harmless because nothing had happened yet, and I kept moving that line every time I got close to it. Coffee wasn't cheating, a long lunch wasn't cheating, and by the time I was in a hotel room with him in July, I'd already crossed so many smaller lines that the big one almost didn't feel like a decision anymore. It felt like the next sentence in something I'd already started writing. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I'd stop once I felt like myself again. Except every time I saw him I did feel like myself again, and that terrified me more than the guilt did, because it meant the problem wasn't him. It was how much of myself I'd stopped being able to find anywhere else. The flowers were stupid. I know that now. I had them sent to the office because I couldn't stand the idea of nothing marking any of it, like it had to be invisible to be safe. I couldn't look at the school pickup calendar on the fridge some mornings, the one with Mia's dance schedule and Noah's soccer practice in my own handwriting, because I knew what I'd done the night before and it didn't match the woman who wrote that calendar. I started taking my phone into the bathroom because I couldn't stand the sound of a text arriving at the dinner table while I looked at my own children's faces. There was one night in September, I almost told you everything. You'd asked if I was okay, actually asked, unprompted, and for about 4 seconds I was going to say it, all of it, right there in the kitchen. And then Noah started crying upstairs, and you went up to him, and the moment closed, and I told myself that was a sign I wasn't supposed to say it yet. I know now it wasn't a sign of anything. It was just a 4-year-old needing water at exactly the wrong moment, and I used it as permission to keep going another 6 weeks. I didn't interrupt any of it. I sat with my hands around a coffee mug that had gone cold an hour earlier, and I let her get to the end of it, because some part of me understood, even furious, even gutted, that this was the only time in 9 years she was going to say all of this out loud, and I owed it to both of us to actually hear it. When she finished, neither of us spoke for a long moment. So what now? She said finally, and there was no plea in it, no bargaining. Just exhaustion. Now, I said, you tell me if it's over. It's over, she said. It ended 2 weeks ago, actually. He said it was getting complicated with his own marriage. I hadn't figured out how to tell you it ended before you found out it happened. Something in me went very cold and very clear at that. Not the fight and scandal version of me from 10 minutes earlier. Something quieter and, in a strange way, more dangerous. You weren't going to tell me at all, I said. You were just going to let it disappear, the way everything disappears in this house when nobody says it out loud. She didn't argue with that. I think she knew it was true. I didn't know it yet, walking up those stairs alone that night while she stayed at the kitchen table. But the fight we'd just had wasn't actually the end of anything. It was the loudest part of the beginning. I filed for divorce 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday, the same day of the week everything in this story seems to have happened on. I understood something, sitting in the lawyer's office signing the first round of paperwork, that I don't think I could have understood a year earlier. That denial isn't weakness. It's a decision. You choose it because the alternative costs more than you think you're ready to pay. I'd been choosing it for years, long before Marcus ever existed, and Elena had been paying the actual cost of that choice alone, in a marriage where she'd started disappearing and nobody, including her own husband, had noticed the shape she was leaving behind. That doesn't make what she did right. I want to be clear about that, because I spent a long time in the months after telling myself a story where I was equally responsible for everything, and that story was as much a lie as the one I'd told myself before the terminal. My conflict avoidance built a house with no windows in it. It didn't build the door she walked through. Rachel told me, eventually, the rest of what she'd known. That she'd seen Elena's car at that Hampton Inn twice, not once, and had spent 2 months deciding whether loyalty to me meant telling me or protecting me from something I might not survive hearing. I was wrong, she said, the week the divorce was finalized. I should have told you the first time. I told her I understood why she hadn't, and I meant it mostly. The Dental Association confirmed, when my lawyers subpoenaed the records for the settlement, that there had never been a second certification course scheduled in Charlotte at all. Elena had built the second trip entirely on paper, 3 weeks in advance, before either of us had ever said the word Marcus out loud in our kitchen. I don't know if she canceled it herself once it ended, or if it simply evaporated the way everything she'd built that year eventually did. I never asked. Some questions I finally understood weren't mine to need answered. Marcus's marriage did not survive the fall either, though not because of us directly. His wife found out independently, through a friend of Priya's, in a piece of Asheville's small-town machinery that none of us had engineered. He moved to Knoxville sometime in the spring. I heard, secondhand, that he wasn't seeing anyone new. I felt nothing about that, which surprised me more than feeling something would have. Elena kept the dental hygienist job. She did not keep the house, the second car, or, per the settlement my lawyer negotiated hard for, more than every other weekend custody for the first year, based largely on the documented pattern of fabricated trips during a period when she'd been the children's primary at-home parent. I didn't ask for that outcome out of cruelty. I asked for it because a judge, looking at 11 florist charges and a fabricated certification course and a folder full of dates, agreed with my lawyer that stability mattered more right now than an even split, and some quiet, unfamiliar part of me was finally willing to ask for what I actually needed instead of what kept the peace. Mia asked me, about 4 months after Elena moved into her own apartment, why Mommy didn't live with us anymore. I told her the truth, in the smallest version a 7-year-old could hold, that Mommy and Daddy had stopped being able to make each other happy, and that it wasn't anything she or Noah had done. She thought about that for a while, chewing her lip the way her mother used to, and said, I still miss her every day though. And I said, me too, some days, which was true in a way that had nothing left in it that I needed to protect either of us from. I could have stayed angry. For a while I was furious in a low, constant way that sat under everything, the kind of anger that shows up in how hard you close a cabinet door. I chose not to stay there. That was the only kind of winning that ended up matching. I started sleeping through the night again sometime around February, the first real stretch of it in almost a year. I hadn't announced that to anyone, hadn't marked it on a calendar. I just noticed, one gray morning making Noah's lunch, that the weight I'd been carrying wasn't there anymore, and I stood in the kitchen for a second just to be sure, the way you check a beam twice even after the calculations already told you it would hold. I'm not the same man who stood frozen in that laundry room with a hotel receipt in his hand. I'm quieter in different ways now, the kind of quiet that asks the question instead of avoiding it. I ask Mia about her day and wait through the actual answer instead of the shorthand version. I told Rachel, last month, exactly how angry I'd been at her for staying silent as long as she did, instead of swallowing it the way I would have a year earlier. It cost something to say. It cost less than not saying it. If you've ever found out the ground under your life wasn't what you thought it was, you already know there's no clean version of what comes after. There's just the part where you start rebuilding more carefully than you did the first time, and you notice, eventually, that you're standing a little steadier than you used to. The most painful contradiction in this story isn't Elena's affair. It's that William spent 9 years mistaking the absence of conflict for the presence of a marriage, and never once considered that the two might not be the same thing. His entire identity as a good husband was built on structural terms. Nothing visibly cracked, so nothing was assumed broken. But a marriage isn't a beam under static load. It's two people who need active maintenance, not just the absence of collapse. What makes this story more than a simple betrayal narrative is the accumulation effect running underneath it. No single missed signal, the wrong terminal, the florist charges, Mia's offhand comment about the bathroom phone, Rachel's careful face over pot roast, would have been damning alone. It's the compounding of small, dismissible details across months that finally became undeniable. The same way a structure doesn't fail from one flaw, but from the slow accumulation of stress nobody addressed in time. William's engineering instincts, ironically, were the exact tool that eventually let him see the pattern, once he finally let himself look. The point of no return wasn't the affair itself, or even the confrontation. It was the moment Elena admitted she'd planned to let the relationship disappear without ever telling him it had ended, revealing that even in crisis, invisibility remained her default mode of self-protection. That single admission told William something the affair alone hadn't. This wasn't a lapse he could rebuild trust around, because the instinct to erase rather than confront was still fully intact. Elena's perspective deserves honesty without excuse-making. Her fear of disappearing inside her own life was real, and the story doesn't ask the audience to dismiss it. But an unmet need is an explanation, not a justification. And the story is careful to keep those separate, letting her monologue reveal the why without asking anyone to forgive the what. What stays with me most isn't the affair. It's how ordinary every warning sign looked in the moment it appeared. A wrong terminal. A missing exclamation point. A neighbor's face going careful for half a second. None of it screamed. It just quietly waited to be noticed. Maybe that's the harder truth in stories like this. The signs are rarely dramatic while they're happening. They only become obvious in hindsight, once you're forced to look back and add them up. If there's a question worth sitting with, it's not, how didn't he see it? It's how many quiet signals are sitting in your own life right now, waiting for you to be ready to actually ask about them.